Hi, I'm Karen Falk. I'm Director of Archives for the Jim Henson Company, and this is the Henson.com podcast.
Welcome to the Henson.com podcast, the official podcast of the Jim Henson Company. My name is Grant Bachoco. One of the traditions that Jim Henson started when he founded the Jim Henson Company was the creation and sending out of unique holiday greeting cards. In those early days, the cards were created by Jim Henson himself, and over the years, many artists have given their talents to this holiday tradition that continues to this very day. On this special slideshow episode of the Henson.com podcast, we talk with the director of the Jim Henson Company Archives, Karen Falk, who gives us some more information about the history of the Jim Henson Company holiday greeting card. Well, today we're talking to Karen Falk. Karen, thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, Grant.
Now, we wanted to talk to you about the tradition of Jim Henson and Jim Henson Company holiday cards, and this goes back a long time. Can you talk about when the tradition of Jim Henson making holiday cards first began?
Well, the earliest Christmas card that we have that Jim made goes back to 1956, and he was still living with his parents at the time, but he was in college and he was on television every day working at WRC in Washington, and I guess had a lot of people in his life, whether they were professional contacts or his friends, that he wanted to make sure to send holiday wishes to. So the first card that we have is from 1956.
And what is featured on that card?
It's sort of a dancing figure. It's a silkscreen image. It's a guy sort of jumping up and down holding a Christmas ball. It says, "A Joyful Yuletide." And it's a figure that appeared in a couple pieces of art for him. He did a series of silk screens around that time called, there was one called Hilarity, and it was supposed to evoke the idea of hilarity, people being amused. And he had some figures that looked like this character that's holding the Christmas ball. And at the same time, he did a poster for an event at the University of Maryland that was a rock and roll concert. And there's the same kind of figures in it. So clearly, he sort of got this idea in his head of a joyful person and used it in a couple different places.
One thing I noticed looking over all these cards is that it looks like there's sort of different mediums used. Some of them look like just pencil, some look like crayon. One that features what looks like an early version of Big Bird has an actual feather stuck onto it. Did he like to mix up how he created the cards?
He did. He had been doing a lot of silkscreen work when he was in college, and of course that's printing, and that lends itself well when you're making multiples. And so a lot of his earliest cards are silkscreen, although he had a lot of fun with them, doing them on different kinds of paper, different colors paper. Sometimes he would do a single color silkscreen, and then he would take crayon and hand color them, each one add a red embellishment or something to it. He also did a really nice card that said peace on it in 1958, and it has a dove. And he printed some of those just on paper, but he also printed some on newsprint. And I guess he cut up newsprint and glued it to cardstock and printed it on that. And so it was a sort of a mixing of, different elements or different types of papers. The one you're talking about with the feather for Big Bird was a card that I don't think actually got produced. What we have is a pencil drawing that shows a plucked Big Bird. It says, "Christmas is a time for sharing," and inside is a feather. And, he wrote from "Merry Christmas" from the Muppets. And I think his idea was that, obviously Big Bird shared all his feathers and he was now completely plucked. But that, it was a nice thing to do to share with your friends and family. But I only have sort of the prototype for that. I don't have a printed version, so I have a feeling that maybe that one didn't actually get used.
Now, would he make all the cards by hand, or would he make the first one and then have them printed?
Well, I think for the most part he made them by hand. He had a silkscreen press, and he would have done the silkscreens himself and printed them. Once he was living with Jane Henson, once they were married in 1959, they would have done it together. It would have been a card that went out together. But then some of his other cards had illustrations as he got into the 1960s. He did an illustration of Ralph, for example, in 1963, and another one he might have did an illustration of Big Bird in 1971, and those were black and white illustrations that he had printed, and then he hand colored them in.
Now, you told me that there is actually one card that was drawn by the Henson children?
We do have a card drawn by the Henson children. It's of a Santa and reindeer in a sleigh, and I'm not exactly sure of the date. On one of the printed copies I have, it says 1969 with a question mark next to it in Jim's handwriting. I think Jim wasn't quite sure what year must have gone through these later and dated them. And I'm guessing that Lisa probably drew it, although there's a chance it would have been Cheryl. But if it was 1969, Lisa would have been 9 years old, and it seems like possibly the handiwork of a 9-year-old.
Now, were these cards mostly used for Jim's personal friends, or was it more as a company thing, or how were these distributed?
Well, Jim never divided. He never put a line between his work people and his personal friends. Obviously, there were family members that never worked with him, or friends from high school or something that he never worked with. But in general, his work and his play were all combined, and so these would have gone out from him, as representing his family, his nuclear family, but then they also would have gone out representing his work family as well. So it would have been everything from television executives to, the dry cleaner who did the costumes, to his friends from the puppetry community, people from Puppeteers of America, and that kind of thing. So they would have gone out to everybody. There would have just been the one card that went out from Jim and Jane, and of course, Jim was the company more or less for many, many years. And really into the 70s, when the company expanded, he started having cards that were designed by other people.
Can you talk about a few of the other people who've designed cards?
Sure. Well, we have a lot of nice cards that were illustrated by Michael Frith, of course. He was an expert at Kermit, and so the image of sort of Robin as Tiny Tim sitting on Kermit's shoulder that we associate with the Muppet Christmas Carol actually came before that in the form of a Christmas card. We have a really nice card that Diane Dawson Hearn drew, and she was the artist who did the character designs for The Tale of a Bunny Picnic, and but she did a really nice Christmas card that featured a lot of different characters, both Sesame Street and Muppet Show Muppets, along with Fraggles and Muppet Babies, and they're all in a sled together. Brian Froud did a couple cards. We have a really nice dark crystal Christmas card that has a pod person hoisting a glass of grog, or I don't know, eggnog or something, and wishing everybody a Merry Christmas, spelled in the old British way, MERRIE. Bruce McNally, who was an artist who worked on a lot of publishing projects with us and designed characters, he designed some of the cards as well.
Now, you mentioned to me that there is one card that you don't have a picture of, but there's a very special reason why you don't have a picture of, and that's because it's in Mississippi. Can you talk a bit about that card?
Yes, there's one card that was done in the late 1960s. I'm guessing it was about 1968, based on the characters depicted. And I wish I had one, but it's not. I acquired a binder with samples of all the cards when I came to work here 20 years ago, and this was not among them. But they do have one of them down at the down in Leland, Mississippi, at the Birthplace of the Frog exhibit, which has a lot of stuff about Jim Henson's youth. And it's a really wonderful drawing of a whole bunch of monsters, and Ralph and Kermit, some of the Sam and Friends characters. Splurge, who was first made in 1968 for Hey Cinderella, and the Two-Headed Monster, which appeared on some of the variety shows. And they're all singing Deck Us All with Boughs of Holly. And it's just a really charming piece and really typical of Jim's illustration style from the time. But unfortunately, I don't have it.
So if people want to see it, they have to head to Mississippi.
Yeah, well, that's a good reason to go, I think. Or certainly if you're in that neighborhood and you want to visit the Birthplace of the Frog, you should look out for this card. It's in one of the cases. And, they just dedicated a bridge there. That's the Rainbow Connection Bridge in honor of Jim's 75th birthday. So it's a nice place to visit.
Now, this tradition of holiday cards has continued all the way up through today. Is that correct?
It does. In fact, the Jim Henson Company's card this year is featuring characters from Pajanimals, which is our new show on Sprout. And it's a really charming, nice card, and every year we've made extra special effort to send greetings to all our friends and colleagues and partners, and let them know we are wishing them peace on earth and happy holidays. And some of the cards in recent years have featured characters from Dinosaur Train or Sid the Science Kid, things that we're doing now. Others have featured some of Jim's artwork that we've kind of repurposed for the cards. But in any case, the message is always the same, and that's to send warm holiday greetings to all our friends and family.
So now you mentioned that some of the more recent cards have had like Dinosaur Train and Sid the Science Kid, and the current one has Pajanimals on it. Is this a new tradition of putting current productions on, or does this go back as far back as when Jim was creating the cards?
Oh no, Jim really used whatever was his hot character or project for his Christmas cards, because he was generally so excited about his work. Like I said, there was a Big Bird card in 1971. Sesame Street was really hitting its stride then, and Jim was really excited that his characters were out there on the airwaves, and wanted to share that joy with people. Back in 1970, his card featured all the characters from The Great Santa Claus Switch, which was the special he did with Ed Sullivan's production company in 1970. Ralph, like I said, was on the 1963 one. That was when Ralph made his debut on the Jimmy Dean show, and was becoming very, very popular. And of course, he was the character that stood out to audiences as being connected to Jim. And so it was something Jim wanted to share, the pleasure that he got from that success. So it really goes all the way through, not every year, but if there was something exciting and new that he wanted to share with people, it was an easy way to tell them about it by putting it on a Christmas card.
Okay, well, Karen, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Oh, well, I'm happy to. And Grant, I hope you have a really nice holiday and really enjoy the season.
Thank you. You too. Karen Falk is the Director of Archives for the Jim Henson Company, and we spoke to her via phone from her office in New York. To see more of Karen's work with the Henson Company Archives, be sure to visit Jim's Red Book at www.henson.com/Jim's Red Book. Well, that's going to wrap things up for this episode, and we wanted to let you know that this will be the final episode of the Henson.com podcast. We'd like to thank all the people who've spoken with us over the years. We'd also like to thank all the Jim Henson Company employees who've supported the podcast since 2006. Finally, we'd like to thank you, the listener, for being with us for these 116 episodes of the Henson.com podcast. Now, the episodes will remain up on the internet for the time being for you to come back and visit now and then, and be sure to stay subscribed to the podcast feed because you never know what will come down the line in the future. Again, thank you so much for tuning into the Henson.com podcast. My name is Grant Pachoco. This episode of the Henson.com podcast is copyright 2011, the Jim Henson Company. All rights reserved.